My name is Eric Jeffries. I'm a physical therapy student at Misericordia University, and I'm set to graduate in less than a month now with my Doctor of Physical Therapy degree. One of the things that finishing up your degree entails is that you present your doctoral research at the PT Research Symposium, which was a few weeks ago. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my research experience. So at the symposium, my parents came, all of my professors were there. Anyone from my cohort, we all had 3 clinical experiences, and anyone who was our clinical instructor was also invited to come, and they got continued education credits for, listening to us speak, which was very cool. So we started our research in the spring of 2023, which means that it took us about a little bit over a year and a half to complete. The title of our project was The Effects of Neuromuscular Training on Injury Prevention in Youth Athletes. So we conducted a systematic review, which means that we looked at multiple academic databases and we compiled, it ended up being 15 articles. They all looked at exercise programs that were classified as neuromuscular training, which I'll talk about what that is in a little bit. And they all examined patients or subjects who were ages 7 to 15, which, in conducting our initial research, we found that really was a hole, that there was very limited research that was specifically applicable to that, young athlete population. So, what is neuromuscular training? Down and dirty, it's a mode of exercise that's programmed with the intent of reinforcing motor recruitment patterns necessary for efficient and safe force production for the athlete to select while in the field of play. So since I've started this research, I've encountered professionals who do work with youth athletes, right? And, athletes of all ages. And I've gone out of my way, to ask them their opinion about neuromuscular training since, this is something that I'm very interested in. I've spent a year and a half researching it. And it seems like they have an anecdotal consensus that they will not attempt to modify neuromuscular recruitment patterns in older athletes. So they've been moving a certain way for a long time. It's taken years for them to build up this consistent motor recruitment, years of habitual, consistent movement. And training with the intent of modifying those patterns then is often in vain, because in the field of play, the athlete will have an external focus. They're focused on the things around them, reading and reacting to the game. They aren't really focused on their specific, coordinating movements. And when they're in this purely reactive mode, it's very common for them just to revert back to those motor recruitment patterns that they're the most comfortable with. So instead, with this population, we tend to just pack as much strength and endurance on them as we can to make them as safe and efficient as we can in the motor recruitment patterns that they have selected and that they've built up, that they're comfortable with for, years and years. Now, youth athletes are a completely different story. Their neuromuscular recruitment patterns are not as concrete as their older counterparts simply because they've been using them for a shorter amount of time. Youth athletes are also more neuroplastic, meaning that they're more likely to learn new skills. Coordinated athletic movement, it's really no different than something like learning a new language or playing a musical instrument. It's commonplace for people to believe that children can become more proficient in those activities if that new language or that instrument is implemented into their, training regime from a younger age. One of my clinical instructors, he would always say that youth athletes are not just little adults. Their musculoskeletal system is drastically different as it's growing. They're going through growth spurts. In these growth spurts, osseous tissue, bone, will achieve its longitudinal expansion at a rate much more rapid than that of muscular tissue, which instead will lengthen through a slower and more passive process. This asymmetry in growth rate, it really makes the youth athletes vulnerable, as it will significantly influence their posture and their body mechanics in a negative way. It will decrease their performance capabilities and therefore increase their risk of injury. So reinforcing optimal motor recruitment patterns is necessary, possible, and safe, in this youth athlete population. Research conducted on neuromuscular training programs claims that it can increase motor unit coordination and muscle activation while increasing dynamic joint stability, synergistic muscle activity, and trunk control, which really makes it the ideal injury prevention intervention for this particularly neuroplastic population of youth athletes. So it's also important for us to talk about the characteristics of successful neuromuscular training programs. First, what interventions are going to fall under this NMT umbrella? We found that it was really pretty broad. Plyometrics, agilities, core strengthening interventions, as well as resistance training, interventions to improve dynamic stability and postural control. They were all cited in the research as key elements of a neuromuscular training program. So that's a lot. When you're building this program, you'll pick specific interventions. You'll modify the volume of each of these different types of training to meet the individual needs of that athlete for their specific sport. It needs to be a sport-specific program. That's especially true if the program is being implemented on a larger team-wide scale, perhaps as a warm-up. Then if the program is being implemented more on an individual scale, like in a one-to-one traditional PT setting, those sport-specific demands should still be a consideration, but the athlete's individual presentation with their unique deficits should obviously also be considered. So high compliance was also found to be a key element of a successful neuromuscular training program. This is pretty self-explanatory, right? The athlete needs to actually perform the interventions if they're going to, achieve any sort of protective effect. They need to expose themselves to that adaptation driving stimulus. In the research, these programs, like I had previously mentioned, they were performed on a team-wide scale as a warm-up or prioritized later in a practice. So this shifts that issue of encouraging compliance from the youth parents athlete and the young youth athlete themselves to the coaches. So if they show up, then they will receive this intervention, which is very nice. Lastly, the time the athlete was exposed to the program was found to play a specific important role in the protective effects that were achieved. So the program needs to allot appropriate time for neuromuscular and musculoskeletal adaptation to occur. That's vital. One of the articles that we found that we included in our research, they had a pediatric program that they compared to a traditional neuromuscular training program. In the traditional program, the athletes performed the same interventions that were, dosed in a sport-specific manner throughout the entirety of the program. Now, the pediatric group, they really bounced around between different intervention types in an attempt to increase engagement, because I guess that they had assumed that the kids would kind of lollygag or, not participate in as intense of a manner as they should if it was just the same interventions over and over again. But this pediatric group, they did not have the same results that the traditional program did. They just weren't exposed to, these individual stimulus as often as they needed to be to achieve the adaptation and therefore the protective effect. So to conclude this video, I want to talk about how this project will influence my future PT practice. The first thing is that I feel much more comfortable and confident to treat this youth athlete population. I have a solid template right now. I have a good framework that I can adapt to adequately prescribe exercise to the youth athletes who will, come through the clinic doors, who end up on my schedule. I feel pretty good about that. That's something that I did not have prior to this research. I've read something about it, and then that feels good. The next thing is that I'm also became a lot more comfortable using academic databases. I believe that providing services that are evidence-based is a key and critical aspect to producing high-quality physical therapy care. And I definitely had an opportunity to hone my research skills while completing this project. I was able to then apply those skills to each of the in-service presentations that I gave at my clinical rotations. So, I got a chance to actually apply those research skills to various topics and practice, and I feel like by the third one, I was much better at it than I had been prior to participating in this research. So, all in all, I really did enjoy it. I got to take a deep dive into a subject that really does interest me, and I think that I'll be a better practitioner as a result. So if anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns about my research, feel free to drop a comment below, and I'd be happy to respond. That's all I have. Thanks for listening. Bye, guys.